The galaxy had grown accustomed to human silence. That silence was not weakness, not submission, but something far more unsettling: patience. Every empire, coalition, and dominion across the stars had heard of Earth's kind, unpredictable, passionate, strange in their ways, but rarely the first to draw blood. Humans were explorers, traders, negotiators. They made treaties where others raised fleets. They rebuilt where others conquered. And so, most civilizations came to a comfortable conclusion: humanity was harmless. But comfort often breeds mistakes. And the Veyrak Dominion made the last one. The memory of the Veyrak still lingered on the broken edges of Captain Ethan Cross's mind. He could recall the day it began with haunting clarity, as though time itself refused to let him forget. Ethan had been stationed aboard the TSS Resolute, one of Earth's frontier patrol ships, skimming the far edge of human territory. His crew was young, bright-eyed officers who thought the galaxy was a place of wonders rather than dangers. Men and women who still painted names of their lovers on ship walls, who laughed over ration packs, who believed their world was untouchable. That was before the Dominion came. The first message from the Veyrak was not a declaration of war. It was a list. Coordinates, names, colonies. Human settlements spread across the Orion Arm, each marked for what the Dominion called harvest. Ethan remembered standing in the Resolute's bridge, the words appearing across his tactical display, spoken aloud in that guttural, grinding alien tongue. His second officer, Laura Kane, had whispered, "Harvest, what the hell do they mean by harvest?" But none of them needed it explained. The Veyrak didn't just conquer. They consumed. The Dominion struck at Farside Colony first. When the reports arrived, they came in fractured bursts of comms, half-destroyed signals, and civilian cries cut short by static. Ethan's ship reached orbit too late. What remained was silence: cities burned into glass, forests scoured down to ash, oceans boiling with strange toxins. The Veyrak had not come for land, nor resources, nor technology. They had come for flesh. Ethan remembered watching a survivor's recording, a young woman holding a child, eyes hollow with horror, whispering into a cracked comm device as the sky turned red behind her. "They're feeding on us." The feed ended with the sound of claws. That night, Ethan stood at the viewport, his fists clenched until blood ran down his palms. Humanity had always believed itself small in the galaxy, one species among many. But standing over Farside's grave, Ethan felt something shift. It was not fear. It was not sorrow. It was anger. And anger, in the hearts of humans, was a dangerous thing. The Dominion underestimated that. When the Galactic Council gathered to debate, they urged humanity to yield. The Veyrak were old, powerful, countless. The counselors spoke of appeasement, of tribute, of survival through submission. Ethan remembered the moment Earth's president, Margaret Hale, stood before them. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of every soul lost. Appeasement is for those who accept slavery. Humanity does not. The chamber fell silent. The council had seen humans fight wars against each other for causes as trivial as borders, pride, and resources. But never had they seen humanity united. Never had they seen them angry together. The anger spread like wildfire, from the domed cities of Mars to the ocean platforms of Pacifica, from the orbital shipyards around Luna to the distant colonies among the stars. Every banner, every faction, every divided nation of Earth became one. Soldiers returned to service. Engineers worked without rest. Old fleets were pulled from mothball docks, and new war machines rolled off assembly lines. And for the first time in galactic history, the stars whispered with one thought: "The humans are coming." On the Resolute's bridge, Ethan looked at his crew. Laura Kane's hands no longer trembled over her console, they clenched with purpose. Weapons Officer James Holt no longer cracked jokes during long patrols, his eyes burned with a steady, cold fire. Every soul aboard carried the same unspoken vow. The Veyrak had wanted harvest. They had wanted to carve humanity into nothing but memory. Instead, they had awoken the one thing no species had survived before: human wrath. The Dominion fleet had grown complacent. They believed themselves unmatched, their name etched into walls of conquered worlds, their banners raised over millions of enslaved. They believed humanity would be another forgotten victim. But Ethan knew what was coming. He knew what humanity would become when pushed too far. And as the first Terran armadas assembled beyond Earth's orbit, their hulls black and jagged with new weapons, Ethan whispered the words that every soldier, every survivor, every mother and father across the stars carried in their hearts. No one will ever write the Varak's name on their walls again. The storm was coming. The black of space shimmered with the rising tide of Terran steel. No one alive had ever seen humanity so united. Nations that once quarreled over seas and borders now spoke with a single voice. Factories that once built cargo haulers now birthed warships by the thousands. Entire colonies volunteered their resources, their people, their blood. The Varak Dominion had stirred something ancient in mankind, a fury buried beneath centuries of restraint. And now, with every passing day, that fury sharpened into a blade. Captain Ethan Cross watched as the Resolute fell into formation with the fleet mustering at Saturn's orbit. He had seen fleets before, but never like this. The sight stole his breath, carriers the size of cities, destroyers bristling with plasma lances, experimental vessels whose very shapes whispered of desperation and genius combined. The flagship, the TSS Dauntless, loomed at the center, a vessel forged in secrecy, armed with weapons so classified that even Ethan did not know their nature. Rumor had it that the Dauntless carried technology reverse-engineered from alien relics long buried in Antarctica. The fleet stretched so far that Saturn's rings themselves seemed to frame humanity's war machine. Ethan could feel it, the air in the bridge, the hum of the ship, the look in his crew's eyes. Every ship, every crewman, every captain carried the same word carved into their bones: vengeance. But vengeance was costly. The first strike came at Halion Rift, where the Varak vanguard descended upon a Terran colony. Humanity's response was not a plea nor a retreat. For the first time, human ships surged forward not to defend, but to annihilate. Ethan's Resolute was there. Target lock on flagship, Laura Kane called out, her voice like stone. Fire, Ethan ordered. The plasma cannons unleashed a roar that shook the bridge. The beam cut through the void, piercing the grotesque, organic hull of a Varak warship. The alien vessel writhed as though alive, tentacles of metal and flesh curling in its death throes before it split apart. Direct hit! James Holt shouted, though his voice carried no joy. There was no cheering on the Resolute's bridge. Only silence, only the cold satisfaction of justice being served. The battle was brutal, and the Dominion fought back with their grotesque might. Their ships were living things, grafted with steel, shrieking through columns as if the vessels themselves were alive. They hurled weapons of acid fire, launched claws of metal that latched onto Terran hulls and drilled into steel like beasts feeding. But for every Terran ship that burned, 10 more pressed forward. And when the smoke cleared, the rift was littered with the broken carcasses of Dominion vessels. Humanity had won. The galaxy trembled. Reports spread across neutral systems, tales of humans who did not surrender, who did not bargain, who answered atrocity with fire. Traitors whispered in fear and awe that the Dominion had finally met their match. Worlds long enslaved under Varak rule sent desperate signals, begging humanity to bring their war machines to liberate them. But the Varak were not idle. They had grown fat on conquest, but they had not grown weak. Their retaliation came swift and merciless. The Dominion struck at Erebus Station, a Terran shipyard orbiting Neptune. Thousands died in moments. Ethan received the transmission too late, only fragments of voices screaming, the last image a welder staring at the camera as fire swallowed him whole. For the first time, humanity had felt the bite of their enemy's counterstrike. Ethan sat in his quarters after the battle reports came in, the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders. His hands shook as he poured a glass of water, but he ignored it. His reflection in the viewport showed a man aging faster than time allowed, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched, the haunted look of someone who had seen too much. Laura Kane entered quietly. "Captain," she said, her voice softer now, stripped of steel. He looked at her. For a moment, the facade of command faltered. "They burned children, Laura. Children working in the docks. Do you understand? We're fighting a species that doesn't even see us as people. Just meat." Laura stepped closer, her hand brushing his shoulder. "That's why we can't stop. Ethan closed his eyes. She was right. There could be no truce, no surrender, no compromise. The Dominion had written their fate the moment they touched Farside Colony. Months passed. Battles raged across the stars, the siege of Calyx Gate, the ambush at Darkspire, the liberation of Venthra. Each one carved the Dominion down, bleeding their fleets dry. Each one cost humanity lives they could never replace. But with every loss, their fury only deepened. On the Resolute, the walls once painted with crew names now bore tally marks. Not of victories, but of the Verac ships destroyed, each line a grim reminder of the cost of making humans angry. And slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn. The Dominion's name, once spoken with fear, began to vanish. Slave worlds where their banners had flown now burned those flags. Children who had once been taught to kneel at the sight of Verac patrols now whispered stories of Terran ships appearing like avenging angels. Yet for Ethan, there was no pride, only purpose. As the Resolute cut through the wreckage of another Dominion fleet, Ethan stared at the stars. He knew what was coming. This war would not end with a treaty. It would not end with surrender. It would end only when the last Dominion world was ash. Because there was one truth the galaxy had failed to learn, one carved into every Terran soldier's heart. You can frighten humans. You can wound them. You can even slaughter them. But you must never make them angry. The Dominion was dying. World by world, fleet by fleet, humanity had torn them down. What once was a vast empire stretching across constellations had shrunk into a wounded beast, bleeding from 1,000 cuts. But the beast was not dead yet. The Verac gathered at their homeworld, Torek Prime, pulling every remaining warship, every soldier, every ounce of power they had left. It was a fortress world, wrapped in defensive rings that glowed like chains of fire around the planet. Their leaders believed no force could breach it. They had forgotten what kind of enemy they faced. Captain Ethan Cross stood at the bridge of the Resolute, staring at the tactical display. The Terran fleet stretched across the void, a sea of steel and vengeance. Carriers, cruisers, and dreadnoughts, more ships than humanity had ever gathered in its history. And at the center, the flagship Dauntless, its black hull reflecting the light of Torak's sun. Admiral Jonathan Reed's voice crackled through the comms, calm and unwavering. Today we erase a name from history. The Verac will be remembered only in ashes. All ships advance. The command echoed across the fleet. Engines roared. Thousands of vessels surged forward, a tidal wave of fury bearing down upon Torek Prime. The battle began with fire. Verac warships launched in swarms, living hulls shrieking as they hurled acid storms and burning plasma. Terran cannons answered in kind, their beams tearing through the grotesque vessels. Space itself became a furnace, ships bursting like stars, wreckage scattering into eternal night. The Resolute fought at the vanguard. Target lock on enemy destroyer. Laura Kane shouted. Fire at will. Ethan barked. The plasma cannons unleashed their fury, ripping the destroyer in two. The enemy's dying shriek rattled through the comms before silence claimed it. James Holt fired missile salvos, each one striking true, until the void glittered with burning debris. But the Verac were desperate. They rammed Terran ships, tearing into hulls with claws of steel. Entire vessels were dragged into suicide collisions. Ethan watched the TSS Aurora vanish in a storm of fire, thousands of souls gone in an instant. He forced the grief down. There was no time for mourning. Only victory. Hours passed like minutes. The Dominion's defenses fell one by one. The orbital rings shattered under concentrated Terran fire, collapsing into flaming wreckage that rained down on the planet below. And then came the order. Ground assault begins. Marines, make them remember what it means to face us. The drop pods rained from orbit like meteors. Terran Marines, men and women forged in the furnace of vengeance, stormed the surface of Torek Prime. Ethan watched from orbit as the battle unfolded on the planet. Torek's cities burned as tanks rolled through alien streets. The Verac fought savagely, but desperation was not enough. Humanity advanced with unstoppable precision. Every street was taken. Every bunker was cleared. Every resistance was crushed beneath the weight of human wrath. On the ground, General Marcus Hale, brother to the president herself, led the final push into the Dominion's grand citadel. His voice broadcast across every channel. For Farside. For Erebus. For every colony they burned. No mercy. No retreat. No surrender. The Marines stormed the citadel. The fighting was brutal, room to room, hall to hall. Verac leaders hissed and shrieked, clawing at their enemies with desperation. But none escaped. Humanity did not stop until the throne of Torak itself lay in ruins. On the Resolute's bridge, Ethan received the final transmission. Citadel secure. Dominion leadership terminated. The words hung in the air like a prayer finally answered. The bridge fell silent. Laura Kane closed her eyes, whispering, "It's over." But Ethan knew it was more than that. It was not merely victory. It was erasure. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost unnaturally so. The Dominion had no fleets left, no armies, no leaders. Their worlds were stripped of banners, their monuments torn down, their very names stricken from the records. Where once the galaxy trembled at the mention of the Verac, now their name was spoken only in whispers, and even those whispers faded with time. In the ruins of Torak Prime, human soldiers painted over alien walls. Not with names of the fallen enemy, not with records of conquest. They wrote the names of their dead, the lost of Farside, Erebus, Halion Rift. No one remembered the Dominion's name. And no one ever would. Years later, Ethan Cross stood on Earth, overlooking a memorial etched into black stone. Thousands of names carved into it, glowing softly beneath the night sky. His own reflection stared back at him, older now, weathered, but alive. Beside him, Laura Kane placed a hand against the wall, her eyes glistening. "Do you think the galaxy will remember them?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head. "Not the Verac. Not anymore." She looked at him, puzzled. "Then what will they remember?" Ethan turned his gaze to the stars above, voice steady. "They'll remember what happens when you make humans angry. That's all that matters." And so, the galaxy moved on. The Verac were gone, their name erased, their empire turned to dust. But the lesson remained, carved not into walls, but into the bones of every species who watched and waited in silence. Do not awaken humanity's wrath. Do not test their patience. Do not make them angry. Because the last species that did, no one remembers their name.